Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Okay. Now, President Trump has deferred to the FBI and the Department of Justice with respect to the Epstein records. He says it is your call about releasing them. And I understand that the department and the agency have decided to release them in cooperation with the House committee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're releasing them a little bit at a time. Is that correct?
We're releasing as much as we can, but we are limited by 3 different court orders, and the department went back to each of those judges.
Senator John Kennedy just turned what looked like a routine exchange into a political stress test that Kash Patel may not have seen coming. In a matter of minutes, Kennedy moved from polished FBI talking points to one of the most explosive, unresolved questions in modern American politics, and the shift was impossible to miss. Patel started out sounding like the man who was finally going to clean house, but the moment the conversation veered toward the Epstein files, the entire tone changed. If you thought new leadership meant real transparency, watch this carefully. Kennedy doesn't spring the trap right away. He lets the case build. And when it finally lands, it raises a brutal question about whether Washington changed the faces at the top while protecting the same old secrets underneath. Stay with this, because by the end, the promise of openness starts looking a lot more like a rebrand than a reckoning.
Mr. Director, you and the FBI, working with state and local law enforcement officials in Utah, have caught the assassin of Mr. Charlie Kirk. Is that right?
We have a suspect, yes, sir.
And you did that within 48 hours, did you not?
33 hours.
33 hours. Congratulations. We've had other political assassinations. Back in June, an assassin assassinated Representative Melissa Hoffman, Mr. Hoffman, Senator John Hoffman, and Mrs. Hoffman in Minnesota. You and the FBI and Minnesota state and local law enforcement officials caught the assassin within 48 hours, did you not?
I believe that timeline's correct, Senator.
Congratulations. Sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. Good work. Did Mr. Kirk's assassin act alone?
As I've said since the beginning, Senator, it is very much an ongoing investigation, and I can't speak to the state charges. That's for the state to address on their own, but we are providing them with the same investigatory findings reporting the department. And as I noted to Senator, I believe it was Cornyn or Hawley, that there are a number of individuals that are currently being investigated and interrogated, and a number yet to be investigated and interrogated specific to that chat room. So we are very much in our ongoing posture of investigation.
So others could have been involved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I asked you this last time you were here. Kash, you remember Mr. Peter Strzok and Ms. Lisa Page?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Strzok was an FBI agent. Ms. Page was an FBI lawyer. They were both very aggressive anti-Trump political activists who allowed their political opinions to affect their work at the FBI. Is that a fair statement?
I believe their text messages and their testimony that was secured by the OIG and DOJ speak for themselves.
In fact, Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page were having an extramarital affair, and at one point, Ms. Page texted Mr. Strzok, quote, Trump's not ever going to be president, right? Right? And Mr. Strzok replied, no, he won't. We will stop it, end quote. Ms. Page resigned from the FBI. Mr. Strzok was fired. They promptly sued the federal government and the FBI and Justice Department for releasing their emails, which revealed all of this. The FBI settled that lawsuit for $1.2 million, gave Mr. Strzok $1.2 million cash, gave Ms. Page, who resigned. She wasn't fired, she resigned, she quit. Gave her $800,000. Who, if the FBI made that decision to give them money?
That settlement was reached in the Biden administration when my predecessor was the director.
Who? Are you saying that Chris Wray did?
The only people that can decide that settlement are the Attorney General in conjunction with the director and the administration.
Okay, so you're telling me that Attorney General Garland and Director Wray decided to give them the money. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you took over the FBI, did you find instances of where, under the Biden administration, the FBI had weaponized the agency to push the political beliefs of President Biden?
Sorry, the last part.
When you took over the FBI, did you find instances of where the Biden administration had politicized the FBI to prosecute its political agenda?
Well, I won't speak for other people. Haven't been a target of that weaponization, haven't been a staffer on the House Intelligence Committee, having had the Justice Department weaponized against me for making the findings and leading the investigation of Russiagate. I know what that feels like, and that's why as the FBI director, I'm committed to not ever have that ever happen again, but I'm also committed to fully investigating what was done, and that matter is still ongoing.
So I assume, I take it your answer is yes.
Yes, sir.
And you're firing those people, is that right?
Anyone that politicizes their job at the FBI will not work at the FBI.
Okay. You've heard some of my colleagues either implicitly or otherwise suggest that you have politicized the FBI to prosecute the political beliefs of President Trump. Is that true?
I don't know how that can be true when the stats that I cited, to include the 23,000 arrests, 6,000 weapons seized, 1,600 gang and criminal enterprise organizations, 4,700 children found and rescued, more enough fentanyl seized to kill a third of America. The men and women of the FBI are now on an apolitical mission, and this is why the numbers are historic.
Have you fired people because they voted for Vice President Harris?
I don't ask people who they vote for, and neither does the FBI.
Okay. But you've given people polygraphs, have you not?
Many people in the FBI take polys.
The FBI does that all the time.
Yes, sir.
Does it not?
Yes,
For
sir.
a long time, is that correct?
Decades.
All right. I want to ask you about the Epstein files. Have you seen the Epstein files?
I have not reviewed the entirety of it myself, but a good amount.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that Mr. Epstein trafficked young women, including, in some instances, minors, for sex to himself?
That was specifically the allegations in the 2018 indictment in the Southern District of New York.
Okay. Who else did he traffic these young women to?
In terms of what the investigation, again, going back to 2008, Mr. Acosta, who limited the investigation and limited the search warrants and limited the parameters of the investigation, the only thing we are able to speak to publicly, because he was given a non-prosecution agreement by Mr. Acosta, is that first time period from, I believe, don't quote me on this, 97 to 2001-ish. And then when the Trump administration courageously reopened it.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm going to run out of time. You've seen most of the files. who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one
For the information that we have
in the files.
in the case file.
Okay. Now, President Trump has deferred to the FBI and the Department of Justice with respect to the Epstein records. He says it is your call about releasing them. And I understand that the department and the agency have decided to release them in cooperation with the House committee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're releasing them a little bit at a time. Is that correct?
We're releasing as much as we can, but we are limited by 3 different court orders, and the department went back to each of those judges to waive those court orders or have them lifted, and each of those judges declined.
Will you release all of them, or at least as many as you can?
We will release everything we are legally permitted to do so. We are continuing to work with the House on the subpoena request. We have substantially complied with it, but we will continue to release whatever we are legally permitted to do so.
Okay. I strongly encourage you to do that, Kash. This issue's not going to go away. And I think the central question for the American people is this. They know that Epstein trafficked young women for sex to himself. They want to know who, if anyone else, he trafficked these young women to. And that's a very fair question. I want to know that answer. And I think you're going to have to do more to satisfy the American people's understandable curiosity in that regard.
Mr. Chairman, may I just respond to that? I agree, Senator. And what we have done, and just to remind folks, the Epstein case files existed in the 2 prior administrations, in the Obama administration and the Biden administration. And they didn't release anything. And there was President Trump in the first administration that renewed charges against Mr. Epstein. And I know it's a little complicated to understand, but what exists in the Epstein case files was a direct result of the limited search warrants from 2006 and 7, which hamstrung future investigations because of the non-prosecution agreement. And multiple administrations had the opportunity to look at the entirety of that case file and recommend prosecutions against anyone that was trafficked under Mr. Epstein and anyone that participated in that trafficking. And the only person to bring charges was the prior administration against Mr. Epstein. Now, I am not saying that others were not trafficked and others were not involved. What I am telling you is that based on the information we have, and we have continuously and publicly asked for the public to come forward with more information. If there is, we'll look at it. But based on credible information, we have released all credible information, and the information that the Department of Justice and the FBI never releases is information on investigations that are not credible. And we don't release the names of victims who weren't credible, but in the same time, we don't release the names of victims who were credible. And so that's by law. And so the information we are releasing now is historic, and it is also to the maximum capacity that the law allows. And I know that's not going to satisfy many, many, many people. But if they wanted it done right, then the investigation from its origination should have been done right, and he should not have been given a get-out-of-jail-free card to do jail on the weekends for 12 hours a day, and he should have been investigated fully for the entirety of his crime and criminal enterprise, not just from 1997 to 2000.
Did you catch what Kennedy was doing there? Because this is why seasoned senators can be so dangerous in a hearing like this. He doesn't come out swinging. He doesn't start with accusation. He starts with praise. He talks about the FBI's response times, the arrests, the rescued children, the kind of numbers that make for a polished headline and an easy clip. And Patel steps right into it. He sounds confident, comfortable, in control. He leans on the stats, leans on the message, and leans on the idea that this FBI is finally focused, finally serious, finally above politics. On the surface, it sounds like the reform story people have been waiting to hear. But Kennedy isn't just making conversation. He's setting the table. He's creating contrast. Because the higher the witness climbs on the strength of his own talking points, the harder the drop hits when the questions get real. That's what makes the pivot so effective. Kennedy lets Patel spend time presenting the FBI as competent, mission-driven, and unafraid to confront politicization inside the system. Patel even frames himself as part of that cleanup effort, someone willing to push back against people who turned institutions into political weapons. For a moment, it sounds like the message is airtight, like the Bureau is back on offense, like the old era is over. But Kennedy understands something a lot of politicians don't. If you want to expose a weak point, don't rush it. Let the witness relax. Let him believe the room is friendly. Then move straight to the contradiction. And that's when the conversation shifts from success stories to something much more uncomfortable. Kennedy brings up the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page settlements, more than $1 million for one, hundreds of thousands for the other, under the Biden administration. These are not random names in this story. Patel himself has been associated with the broader argument that figures like that represented the politicized culture Americans were told would be confronted, not rewarded. So now the question becomes obvious. If this is the era of accountability, how do those payouts fit the story? Patel tries to create distance. He notes that those decisions happened before he was in charge. He points back to what was done to him during Russiagate. He frames himself as someone who knows weaponization firsthand, which is meant to strengthen his credibility and insulate him from the charge that he's now defending the same system he once condemned. But Kennedy isn't chasing Patel's biography. He's chasing the pressure point. He's moving toward the one subject that instantly changes the air in the room, the one issue that cuts through partisan branding and goes straight to public distrust, the Epstein files. And right there, you can feel the hearing change. The easy rhythm disappears. The polished confidence starts to tighten. Because talking about arrest numbers is one thing. Talking about one of the most notorious and publicly distrusted cases in America is something else entirely. Patel, who had been speaking with certainty, suddenly sounds far more restrained. He acknowledges that he has not personally reviewed the full body of the material. That alone is enough to make people stop and ask questions. Then Kennedy asks the question millions of Americans have asked for years in one form or another. Who else was involved? Who else was this operation connected to? And Patel's answer, as presented in the exchange, is that there is no reliable information showing Epstein trafficked these women to other individuals. That is the moment everything snaps into focus. Because whether you agree with Patel's legal framing or not, that answer lands like a thunderclap. Not because it resolves anything, but because it sounds so radically at odds with what the public has long suspected, debated, and demanded clarity about. Patel then points to the limits of the original investigation, the way the case was built, the decisions made years earlier, and the legal restrictions that now govern what can and cannot be disclosed. He references court orders. He references earlier officials. He points backward, toward prior administrations and prior failures. In other words, he moves from the language of disruption to the language of institutional constraint, and that is exactly why this exchange matters. Because this was supposed to be the break from the old script. The whole promise surrounding figures like Patel was not just that they would criticize the system, but that they would expose what the system had protected. Yet when the pressure arrives on the most sensitive question of all, the answer sounds painfully familiar. The names may have changed, the branding may have changed, the rhetoric may have changed, but the core message suddenly feels like the same one Americans have heard for years. We would tell you more, but our hands are tied. We would release more, but the process won't allow it. We would go further, but the old limitations are still in place. That's the trap Kennedy set. Not a partisan trap, a credibility trap. Because once Patel spends the first part of the hearing projecting control, speed, effectiveness, and moral clarity, he can't easily fall back on bureaucratic helplessness without exposing the contradiction. You cannot be the man who promises to confront the rot and then, at the crucial moment, sound indistinguishable from the bureaucracy you were expected to challenge. That is what makes this exchange so politically potent. Kennedy doesn't need to prove every theory floating around the internet. He only needs to force the audience to notice the gap between the promise and the explanation, between the image of total reform and the reality of institutional limits, between the swagger of transparency and the language of restriction, and the public hears that gap loud and clear. This is not just about one case. It's about trust. It's about whether Americans are supposed to believe that an agency capable of moving fast, making arrests, and producing impressive operational numbers somehow remains unable, after all these years, to give satisfying answers on the question that has haunted this story from the beginning. That disconnect is what fuels suspicion. It is what keeps this issue alive. It is why Kennedy said, in effect, that the public's curiosity is not going away. Because for millions of people, this is no longer just a legal matter. It is a test of whether powerful institutions ever truly expose the networks, failures, and protections that exist around elite misconduct, or whether they simply manage public anger until the story cools off. Patel may believe his answer was legally accurate as framed in the hearing, but politically, the damage comes from how it sounds. It sounds like caution where people expected confrontation. It sounds like containment where people expected revelation. It sounds like a new spokesman explaining why the old walls are still standing. And that is why Kennedy's performance was so effective. He let Patel sell the audience on a new era first. Then he forced him to explain why, on the question that matters most to public trust, the result still looks the same. That's not just uncomfortable, that's devastating. So now the real question is bigger than Patel himself. If even the officials presented as reformers end up citing the same limits, the same barriers, and the same reasons the public can't get clear answers, then what exactly changed? Was this ever about transparency? Or was it about making the system look different without forcing it to reveal more than it wants to? That's why this hearing moment hit so hard. Not because it closed the book, but because it reopened the doubt. And in Washington, doubt is often more dangerous than outrage. Outrage burns hot and fades. Doubt lingers. Doubt spreads. Doubt makes people wonder whether the machinery of power protects itself no matter who's in charge. And after this exchange, that question is very much alive. Drop a comment below. Do you think Patel's answer reflects real legal limitations in the case? Or did this hearing expose something much bigger? That the new FBI may be speaking in a different tone while guarding the same old doors?